I'm Minessa Konecky, and this is Research Administration in a Nutshell, a series where I make short videos about different activities that we engage in as research administrators and what it's like to be an RA. Drop a like on the video or subscribe to the channel on YouTube for more research administration stuff. And a massive, massive thank you to all of the supporters on Patreon who help keep my channel alive. More information on how you can support at the end, but for now, let's get going. My hair is something else today. Wow. We're going to need to sort some of this out, I think. There's some stuff happening here. Hi. So I had a call the other day with one of my clients, and they asked me a question about taking over new portfolios. Like they're taking over a new portfolio in a new organization, and they're also new at research administration, and they wanted to start off on the right foot, but they don't know what they don't know. And so the question was, what do you do, or what would you do as a research administrator? I mean, I am a research administrator. What have you done as a research administrator when you go in and take over like a new portfolio, whether you are in the same organization moving to a different portfolio, or whether you are just getting a brand new portfolio? How do you deal with that, right? And more importantly is also how do you, and that's one part of it, the tactical, but what the question really was how do I build a relationship with my investigator that is like a good one, right? Because there's many different types of relationships that RAs can have with their investigators, and we'll go into that on another day. But the one that we want to have is a collaborative one where we work together, where things flow. You know, I was talking to somebody the other day about the passion that many of us have for this job has a lot to do with the work itself. And how can we set ourselves up for maximum success in that space? So I talked to my sister and I was like, hey, what are some of the things that you look at? But there are some key things that I do when going into a new portfolio, regardless of my experience with the organization or not. Obviously, if you have more experience with the organization, you already know the infrastructure, it's certainly easier. But if you don't, then in that case, you're also learning things about the organization at the same time as you're learning about the PI and their science, and it's an awful lot to be doing all at once. So the first thing you want to do is systemize it, right? Put it in a space where you're like, okay, I'm going to go down this list of things, and this is how I'm going to approach it. So I actually approach all of them the same way. I've approached them the same way for 15, 20 years. It's developed over time. It's adapted a little bit. But this is enough to get me to the point where, one, I feel like I have a basic understanding of someone's portfolio to where I can speak about it, even though I may not necessarily know it like in my soul. I can at least say, okay, I've heard this before. It's almost as if, it's almost kind of like the way I like to think about it is, you're not going to know every single thing that has happened in every Star Trek episode of all time, because there's like a lot of Star Trek. Like there's a lot. But most people can have a generalized conversation about Captain Kirk, Jean-Luc Picard, and have an understanding of like Star Trek, where it fits into our culture, things like that, right? So you can still talk about it with enough to sort of know what's going on, just with the people's names, without having a deep understanding of who the Borg are and when Jean-Luc was taken and how long he had to deal with that, and, you know, all of the other things that come with really being entrenched in Star Trek for a really long time, right? And so when you're starting out in any portfolio, it's like you're going into a new TV show, right? Now, sometimes you're coming into a new TV show sort of like in the middle. And so you don't know what's happened in the last 6 seasons, right? So there's relationships that have happened. There's money that has come and gone, and problems that have been solved, and some problems that have been solved but are still being talked about this many years later. So there's a lot of history that you are walking into whenever you take over a new portfolio. And that can also feel intimidating. But again, it doesn't have to. With a few pieces in place, you can put yourself in a position where you feel like you're like, okay, I have enough of an understanding of this particular portfolio for me, or this PI for me, to be able to then sort of move forward in a conversation at a surface level. I know who Kirk is, I know who Spock is, and so on. With the knowledge that the things that we talk about today, as you have those conversations over the course of 3 months, which is typically, it takes about 3 months for you to just figure out where the light switches are in a place. And then another 3 months till you're like, oh, I feel a little bit, you know. And now that's literally just to understand where the light switches are and feel comfortable with going and turning on and off the light switches. This job has a learning curve, right? And so you're getting to know these things, but at the same time, like if somebody's been doing this job for 6 months and like, I don't feel that great about it, I still feel like I don't know what I'm doing. Don't worry, that's also part of the job. But in terms of your ability to be able to have a conversation and refer back to your notes, you will have that level of familiarity with it. So the areas in which I usually get involved, well, I usually kind of dive into things when I first get a portfolio. Is the first thing I like to do is look at the science, right? And by science, I don't mean I read the science and say, oh, this is what this person is doing, or like this person is studying this or learning about that or whatever. Like I don't get deep into the nitty gritty. But I'll look at the abstracts. I will look at the kind of titles, that they have been awarded or that they have applied for, because that kind of gives you an idea of the kind of research someone gets involved in. You'll know right off the bat, oh, this person is in psychiatry. So you're helping this person with psychiatry. But in other cases, it might be that there's something a little bit more specific. Like, for me, I have chronic migraine. And so studies I was actually a part of, though I did not manage these, were related to statins on migraine, health on migraine, light on migraine, things like that. And that all of those keywords told me that, okay, this investigator works on migraine, right? And so for me, obviously, personally, that has a deep connection. So, and I've never managed a PI who worked on migraine. So one day I hope to be able to do that. Be like, oh my God, you're helping me. Thank you. But reading the titles and getting an idea of their abstracts sort of gives you an idea of, okay, this is the story of this investigator. Because what you're really trying to understand is, who is this investigator, right? This is Deanna Troy. Tell me about her, right? So you can get a basic understanding. This is what this PI likes to do. Now, you can do this in a couple of different ways. You can Google them. You can look on the website. You can, if you find if you're already in the system, so let's say most of the grants come from NIH for you, or they're in Commons. If you are an AOR in Commons or have access to the grant list, you can just look for your PI and see what they've been funded all this time. Be like, oh, okay, this is what they've applied for. They've applied for 30 of these or whatever. But getting that kind of high-level understanding gives you a context under which all of these things are happening, right? So if you think about how we deal with our budgets at home, you know the whole story of your budget in your house and the things where everything goes. But imagine if you were just thrown in without any context and said, here's money, now spend it properly, right? There's just really, I don't know, how do I spend it properly? So this sort of gives you an understanding of, okay, I understand now what this person works on. Now you may find at this point that this person does a lot of clinical trials. This person does a lot with bench research. This person is not science related at all and is a social science, right? Whatever it is, this is where you start to get that idea. Now, that is typically where you will start to feel some sort of connection to something, where you're like, this is really interesting. I want to ask about this. And keep those questions, write them down and ask your PI these questions, because they love to talk about their research, and it gives you an opportunity to understand how our role makes that happen, right? So like, we are a very fundamental part of the research, but the two things to be connected need the PI and the RA to both have enough of an understanding of the other side to be able to translate and have like a conversation, right? And depending on the PI or the RA, you may be able to go further or not as far in science and business. So for example, I am not very scientifically inclined, so I typically maintain a higher level. And I understand the context just in terms of, what is it that you're doing? What are you helping? Is it bench? Is it, because I typically work in healthcare. Is it bench? Is it clinical trials? Like, what is that situation? Just so that I understand it, but I'm not going to understand the T cells and whatever the actual nitty gritty of the science is. It might be really cool. I just may not understand it. I always like it when investigators explain it to me in layman's terms. So now that you've learned this, when you meet with them, have a list of questions that you ask, like, and start with this. Why do you do what you do? Right? Why do you do this? One of my favorite books is Start With Why by Simon Sinek. And the link to his TED Talk is popping up right now. So definitely watch that if you have an opportunity. He has a delightful accent. I could listen to that man read the phone book. So, but watch the TED Talk because it's better than the phone book. So the next thing then is when you have this conversation, and this is where you come in, right? In terms of your context, who are you? So you're going to ask your PI, why do you do this? What excites you about this? What are you studying, right? You'll have PIs who are really excited and they tell you the whole story in layman's terms and you understand exactly what they're saying and you're like, this is so cool, I totally get it. Then you'll have somebody who tells you the nitty gritty details and you're listening to them and you're like, oh my God, I regret asking this question because I'm getting this in so much detail. I am not understanding this, right? My wife actually helped me a lot with this many years ago. She loves to listen to people talk about things that they love to talk about. So if you're excited about something, she loves to hear you talk about it. And so one of the things that I do is I just enjoy listening to them talk about it and the passion and like try to just kind of flag on where I can, because the relationship that we're building in this moment is very powerful, right? Because they're sharing something they love. I'm participating in it. I'm understanding it. It's great. don't forget that there is another side to this relationship, and that's you, right? So don't feel like when you're in this meeting, it's just for you to be able to ask the PI so you can learn what you need to know to help them. This is also the opportunity for you to share about yourself. Why are you a research administrator, right? Tell them about that. If you're brand new, or if you've hopped around a lot, or whatever it is that you love, talk about your favorite thing about research administration. Like, share your passion for the job. Share your passion about why you do it. Maybe you don't do research administration for any other reason other than it pays you well. You've done it for many years, and you're going to do it, retire, and then, the reason why you actually do it is because you love boating. You love boating more than anything in the whole world, and the reason why you do research administration is because it gives you a very specific schedule that lets you boat. Share that. Right? It doesn't always have to be about work. It can be about something else, but share your passion. It allows your investigator to get an understanding of who you are and you them, which then makes it actually a lot easier as you move into this next space, which is talking about your grants. Now, just to give you an idea of what I typically talk about with an investigator, so it depends on the kind of conversation we've had, because not all, there's many reasons why I do what I do. For me, there's one, it's the science, in that my mom died of cancer many, many years ago, a curable cancer now, which is fabulous. So other people don't have to lose their moms like that. They'll have more time with them. I love supporting that. I also love supporting people who have fun, new, different ideas, who are curious about what would happen if, because that's what research is. I'm curious about X. I love being a part in that space. I like being in that creative space, and I love being around people who are excited about what they do. And then for me, there's the other part is my own chronic illness, right? So, my community is chronically ill. Almost every person I know either is a caregiver for someone, or they themselves have a condition that limits their spoons and their ability to exact as many hours out of the day as someone who is not chronically ill. And so I really enjoy being in spaces where investigators are working on that, because for me, that's really fun to see how we are trying to mitigate pain and help people live really exciting lives and happy lives, or whatever kind of life they want to live, even if they're going to be in pain all the time, right? Or how can we lessen the pain, or what have you, right? So and I had the opportunity to work with Mike Danino many, many years ago. This is so many years ago, related to mindfulness. He did a study on how does mindfulness impact pain in the body. And there was a whole clinical trial I was a part of. This was so long ago. It was before mindfulness was even a thing that people talked about. And it made such a huge difference. To this day, it's really interesting. I'm actually now on a cycle myself where I'm kind of actually trying to work on mindfulness for my pain, because it really did work very well. I just haven't been practicing it, and so my pain is higher. So that's another reason. And then the third reason I love to do this, four actually now I realize. The third reason I love to do this is because I love solving problems. I love solving problems. I love seeing a portfolio that's a disaster where an investigator is feeling like, oh my God. And I love putting it into a space where it's beautiful, everything's where it needs to be. You hand it over, and the new person who then takes over that portfolio comes in armed to the teeth with That comes into that portfolio with out the added pressures of having to solve all these old problems, and they really get set up for success, right? And so that's such a beautiful thing to watch, where it's the part of being a research administrator that we love. That's the part that you love, right? So that's typically how I will share one of those. Sometimes over the course of my relationship with the PI, all of these will come out over time. They'll learn about my mom, they'll learn about this, because we talk about a lot of different things. But I like to start with sharing whichever one I feel in that moment will create the deepest connection between us. So if this person has talked about how much they love working, with people with migraine because of pain and so on, which one of my the investigator who investigated me, right? I was this clinical trial. That in and of itself, now we're that's a connection where I say, oh my God, what have you learned? That now it's literally about me, right? How fun. And so then they see this is why you're doing this. Because a lot of times what I've found over the years is that when investigators and RAs don't know why each other is doing it, it's like, hi, I'm your RA, I'm here to do your math, and I'm going to tell you about your finances, and I'm going to do all those things, which is all true. But when it is very transactional like that, investigators feel like they don't matter, or like they're just another number, and then RAs feel like they are being put in a subservient position to the investigators, where whatever the investigator wants you to do, and it creates a really unhealthy dynamic. If we approach this from the dynamic of COO and CSO, right? Chief Scientific Officer and Chief Operating Officer, to coming together, and Finance Officer and Executive Officer and all the other officers, right? That's all us as RAs, and the PI, who's also the visionary. If we then come together in a conversation about these are our shared interests, these are our shared experiences that bring us here so far, that has never failed to start a really solid relationship. I've never had a PI that didn't love me and that I didn't love back. I've had many difficult PIs. God, I have had many difficult PIs. I have had people who were difficult to work with, but I have found ways in which to engage with them. And these are the tactics that I've used, right? And these are the tactics that I've coached my clients and people that I've hired. Ultimately, whenever I get a new RA, the very first thing I do is I sit down and have this conversation with them. It's not just about doing your finances. That is a very critical part of it. But without the context, there's no real way for us to understand why we're doing any of this. Why are we doing this? I was talking to someone yesterday who was like, why are we doing this? It was amazing. So, and that ultimately, why are we doing this, right? Thank you for watching. Another massive thank you to the supporters on Patreon who help keep my channel alive. You can support for less than $5 a month. Check the video description for links to the Patreon, LinkedIn, and my website. And as always, have a great day.